Good evening, everybody. Happy 4th of July. As our broadcast goes on, you can hear the very end of the New York City fireworks show in the background of our broadcast. There's, booms as fireworks are going off outside. They've been going off for the last hour, so it's probably going to wind down soon. But yeah, we're going to do our show here tonight, just like every night. Every night we have a live stream. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We're going to do our show. So happy 4th of July, everybody. Let's do our show.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. So glad that you are here tonight. Can you hear the fireworks in the background there? Can you hear them? Can you hear the fireworks show? I think this is the climax of the fireworks show. I think it's going to end here after that. But yeah, can you hear them? Can you hear them? They're getting pretty loud, the fireworks that are going on outside. It is the 4th of July. It's just after 10 o'clock at night here in New York City, and those fireworks, they're letting it all loose. Can you hear it? Can you hear the fireworks? Can you hear the fireworks? Yeah, they're letting it all loose. Happy 4th of July to everybody, as always. But anyhow, we are going to do our live stream here tonight, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar, the way we do things here on this show is that I give my opening remarks, which are then followed by the roll call, or we find out who's on the other side of the camera. And then from there, after we've done our opening remarks, after we've done the roll call, then I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. That's how we do it. So send some super chats, get me talking. In the second half of our show, I'll just talk about what's on my mind for the first half of our show. That's the way we do it. So I'm glad to be here with all of you. So if you've got a super chat, shoot it my way. I will be writing it down, and I can actually play them on the screen now, thanks to this change in the software here on StreamYard. So the super chats are always fun, and I'll be starting my opening remarks. Before I get to my opening remarks for tonight, I do want to make sure that you're all aware that coming up a week from yesterday, Monday, July 10th, there's going to be two really great events in New York City. The first one will be this protest, Peace with Russia, Peace with China, No Police State. That'll be happening at 3 p.m., assembling at 43rd and 6th Avenue. Thank you, Tim, for your super chat. Tim is great. And then later in the day, we will be having an evening panel. July 10th, we'll be having an evening panel, Money and American Injustice, how the U.S. legal system targets the poor. It'll be at 4 West 43rd Street, starting at 7 p.m. That's in Manhattan. We got Jose Vega, the great disruptor, the great interrupter, coming to town. We got Chris Halali of the American Student Union. We got Nick Brana of the People's Party. We got special guest attorneys. Peter Coffin is going to be there. Liam is going to be there. I'm going to be there. Olympia Logic is going to be there. It's going to be a great day. A lot of CPI people coming in from around the country. So if you can come to that, those are both happening back to back, afternoon and evening, July 10th. Now, on top of that, if you're not able to make it, we always would appreciate if you could send us a donation to help us do the events. Here is the donate button on Stripe. If you'd like to give a contribution to help us do these events, donations are always appreciated to help us put on events like this. So that is the way you can donate. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure everyone's aware of that. July 10th in New York City is going to be an awesome day of anti-imperialist activism. So now I can get to my opening remarks, which is got a few things that are on my mind today. Obviously, today is July 4th, the Independence Day, the holiday most associated with American patriotism. That's why the fireworks are happening, in the background there. And because it is July 4th, we're doing a lot of reflection on patriotism, etc. But I also want to draw attention to a very, very serious situation. Very good question, Tim. Very good question. Let me write that down. That also led me to pay attention to a very serious situation that's happening overseas right now. Now, all of you may be aware that in the territory that is contested in the conflict taking place right now, in the territory that has voted to join the Russian Federation, that the Ukrainian government, the US-backed government in Kiev, considers to be its own territory, there is a nuclear power plant. There's a lot of nuclear power plants in the former Soviet Union. And this nuclear power plant has been the subject of military conflict. And Russia has been warning the world about the danger that some kind of provocation could happen at the nuclear power plant. Some kind of explosion, dirty bomb situation could happen at this nuclear power plant. And Russia would be blamed for it. And that would be the excuse of the NATO countries to go all in against Russia and start World War III. Now, I think there is a real possibility such a thing could happen. And this is no joke. This is something we should be very, very concerned about. Russia would have no interest in any kind of disaster happening at the nuclear power plant because it's right on their border. It's an area that they consider to be part of the Russian Federation, that voted to join the Russian Federation. It would be mostly Russians who would die. And not only would the area that is contested be contaminated, but it would probably blow over into Russia proper. So Russia would have no interest in enabling some kind of nuclear incident to happen. Of course, that's not what mainstream media tells us. The way mainstream U.S. media tells us, describes the situation, they say, of course, Russia would plan to do something because Russia is just pure evil. Wahaha, they're just so evil sitting there. Well, think about the facts. It would not be in Russia's interest for there to be any incident at this power plant. However, it would be in the interest of those who would like to draw the United States into the conflict taking place in Ukraine. The USA is already supplying loads of weapons, and military training, and propaganda support, and sanctions. But for those who would like to draw the United States into the conflict fully, provoking some kind of nuclear incident that could be blamed on Russia, would be something that they would probably like to do, probably like to try to do. And that's very disturbing. But it's more disturbing when you know the history, because every U.S. war that has happened, practically, has started with a lie. And this is something I wish more Americans could understand. Every U.S. war begins with a lie. There are so many examples of this. Every U.S. war begins with a lie. In 1898, U.S. newspapers were filled with stories claiming that a ship called the USS Maine had been bombed by the Spanish. This was a U.S. ship, and it was in the harbors of Cuba, I believe. And it sunk for its own reasons, mechanical failures. All the research that has been done now concludes there is no way that ship was sunk by torpedoes, by bombs, by explosions. But U.S. media at the time was flooded with stories claiming that the Spanish had sunk the USS Maine. And that wave of propaganda that flowed through the United States, the slogan that they used was, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain." That was used to get the United States into the Spanish-American War. The Spanish-American War started with a lie. It was a lie. World War I. How did the USA get involved in World War I? Well, the official version of events was that the Germans had sunk an American ship. They'd sunk the USS Lusitania. And that was true. The Germans did sink the USS Lusitania. But it wasn't just some random ship. The USS Lusitania was carrying military hardware. The Germans were at war with the British, and the USA was delivering military equipment to the British. They made it sound in American media like the Germans had just gone out of their way to randomly kill some Americans. When in reality, they were stopping. Thank you, Elena. They were stopping the transport of weapons. The Korean War. They said the Korean War. How did that begin? Well, the standard answer that we get in the United States is we get the version of events where they say North Korea invaded South Korea, which even on the surface of it is an idiotic statement to make because Korea is one country. And after the Second World War, the agreement was that there would be one government for the entire Korean peninsula. However, in the North, the government was led by communists. They'd been liberated by Soviet troops. In the South, the government was led by the United States and former Japanese collaborators. And so in the South, when it was time to have a vote, the government was toppled by a military dictator named Syngman Rhee. Syngman Rhee became the military dictator of South Korea. And when the people on Jeju Island began protesting for their right to vote, to elect their leaders, not have a military dictatorship, they were slaughtered. There was mass slaughter of the people of Jeju Island in South Korea. And it was in response to that, after the people in South Korea were denied the right to vote and choose their leaders, after the democratic government of South Korea was overthrown, and then the democratic government of South Korea overthrown, the military dictator came to power in South Korea, and then that military dictator began slaughtering the South Koreans who were protesting and wanted to have elections. It was only then that North Korea intervened. And many people look at the situation and say North Korea didn't even fire the first shot. That's even still debated. But regardless, the idea that North Korea attacked South Korea, that is not an accurate version of events. Thousands and thousands of Americans died to prevent the Korean Peninsula from having a peninsula-wide democratic election in which the Korean Workers' Party could participate. We were told it was North Korean aggression. No, there was no North Korea. There was no South Korea. North Korea, the government of the northern half of the Korean Peninsula, had called for elections for the entire peninsula. And when that was denied, and when people who protested for that were being slaughtered, that's when the war broke out. The Vietnam War began, or the U.S. military presence in Vietnam escalated with the Gulf of Tonkin. Read about the Gulf of Tonkin incident. We were told that the communists in Vietnam had attacked an American ship. The Gulf of Tonkin. At the Gulf of Tonkin, the communists had attacked an American ship. Well, we now know it was a false flag operation. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was staged. It was a hoax. It was a false flag. The Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese, the communists of Vietnam did not attack the ship. It was a staged false flag, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. There's other examples of U.S. military interventions that are founded based on a lie. Many examples. The U.S. invaded Grenada and toppled the government. They claimed medical students were being killed. I mean, it was a bizarre story that all fell to pieces. It completely fell to pieces after the overthrow of the Marxist government of Grenada. Once the facts were there, it turned out Ronald Reagan's invasion of Grenada had been waged on completely false pretenses. The U.S. invasion of Panama that happened, I believe, in 1990, 1991. Right? We now find out that Noriega, the president, he'd been installed by the United States. He was a military dictator installed by the United States. And he'd been installed to prevent communist expansion. But once he was in power, he realized that he could gain popularity by engaging in populist reforms. And he began enacting populist economic reforms. And so the United States accused him of being involved in the drug trade. And then what eventually happened in Panama, we find out that the reason that the USA invaded Panama and toppled the government, we're told, was that the Panamanian soldiers had fired on U.S. troops. We now find out that U.S. troops deliberately provoked the Panamanian soldiers, attacked them, charged at them. The Panamanian soldiers on the border were standing there doing their jobs, guarding the border, and U.S. troops were charging at them and pointing guns at them as if they wanted to shoot them. And so, yes, they shot back, and then George Herbert Walker Bush got on TV and said, oh, U.S. troops have been fired on, and the USA invaded and overthrew the government of Panama. The Gulf War. Who can forget the Gulf War? The Gulf War happened based on a lie. During the Gulf War, George Herbert Walker Bush was president, and Iraq announced that it intended to annex Kuwait. It said it was going to annex Kuwait. Kuwait was a U.S.-backed monarchy, the Kuwaiti monarchy, backed by the United States. The Iraqi Ba'athist Arab Socialist government announced that they felt they had a right to intervene in Kuwait, and the United States gave them permission. Many people don't look to the details. The United States gave Iraq permission to invade Kuwait. Kuwait thought they were going in with the full blessing of the United States. So Iraq, with the permission of the United States, went into Kuwait. And then immediately there was a barrage of propaganda in American media. And there was the famous Naria testimony, where they got this girl to testify before Congress, and she started crying, oh, they're taking babies and throwing them out of incubators. They're taking babies and throwing them out of incubators. And they showed it on CNN nonstop. We were told that the USA had to intervene and protect the Kuwaiti people and protect Kuwait from Iraq because the Iraqis were taking babies and throwing them out of incubators. Well, we later found out that that woman who testified and gave her crying testimony before Congress had never actually been to Kuwait at the time that this was happening. She was a member of the royal family of Kuwait who was living in the United States. And she didn't testify under oath. Usually when you testify before Congress, they make you take an oath. You have to put your hand on the Bible and pledge to to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But they had a special congressional testimony hearing where she didn't have to do that. It was a hoax. It was a complete hoax. She had never seen babies thrown out of incubators. And she didn't testify under oath. And she was not actually, she had never been in the hospital she said she was in. The whole thing was a big hoax. But the USA bombed Iraq, killed hundreds of thousands of people. U.S. soldiers went into Kuwait and were killed. It was an awful incident. And it was all based on a lie. Are you noticing a pattern here? Every U.S. war begins with a lie. Every U.S. military intervention begins with a lie. I'm just going over this history. Time after time after time. Bill Clinton, 1999, he bombed Yugoslavia. He bombed Serbia. And why did Bill Clinton bomb Serbia? He said that the Serbian government was committing genocide against ethnic Albanians. The Albanians who had fled from Albania to Serbia to get jobs, to the part of Serbia known as Kosovo, in order to get jobs, that they were being rounded up. They had pictures. It was like a concentration camp. They were committing ethnic genocide, ethnic cleansing. Well, we now know that that was a lie. The UN has admitted there was no genocide being committed by the government of Serbia against ethnic Albanians. There was a war going on. There were certainly atrocities committed in that war. But it had never gotten to the level of genocide. And the photograph that they used of a very skinny man standing next to barbed wire was completely staged. The man was just walking. He wasn't behind a barbed wire fence. The man had a disease. He wasn't starved out. But they took a picture of this man standing behind a fence and made it look like the Holocaust. And it turned out that wasn't what was going on at all. All right, you can read all about this. They lied. Were there atrocities committed in Serbia in the civil war between the Serbian government and the Kosovo Liberation Army? Absolutely. But now all the investigations have come forward and said they did not commit genocide. There was not genocide going on in Serbia. So that was a lie. And of course, there's the U.S. invasion of Iraq. They said Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction. At the UN, I remember Colin Powell was sitting there at the UN. They didn't just say, we think maybe he has weapons of mass destruction. They said, oh no, Iraq has got weapons of mass destruction. It's got so many weapons of mass destruction. They had charts and graphs. They had maps and all these different places. And it was all bullshit. It was all bullshit. They had this elaborate presentation about they knew exactly where Iraq's weapons of mass destruction was. And Saddam Hussein tried to buy uranium from Africa. And it was all bullshit. They lied. And the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. Why did the USA invade Afghanistan to begin with? Do you remember this? They said because Afghanistan was harboring Osama bin Laden. Well, the Afghan government said, we will arrest Osama bin Laden and we'll give him to you. He just has to go through our courts first. Never were told that. We were told, the government of Afghanistan, they won't turn over bin Laden, so the USA has to invade. Well, if you actually look at the facts, the Afghan government was willing, the Taliban was willing to turn over bin Laden. They just wanted to follow standard procedure. They wanted to arrest him and extradite him. We now find out. And so that war was also based on a lie. Every single war. I have gone through every single war. The Spanish Civil War, the Spanish-American War, World War I. We talked about the Korean War. We talked about the Vietnam War. We talked about the U.S. invasion of Grenada. We talked about the U.S. invasion of Panama. We talked about the Gulf War. We talked about Bill Clinton going into Serbia and bombing Serbia. We talked about the Afghan War. We talked about the Iraq War. But let's continue. Libya. Do you remember Libya? The USA overthrew the government of Libya because they claimed that Gaddafi was handing out Viagra to his soldiers so that they could rape women. That's what we were told. Susan Rice said before the United Nations that they had proof that Gaddafi was handing out Viagra to his soldiers so they could rape women. Well, that was a lie. Amnesty International, other investigations have said no such thing ever happened. It was all a big lie. We now find out most of the people that fought to overthrow Gaddafi were not Libyan. Most of the people who fought to overthrow Gaddafi were foreign fighters, part of Islamist, Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist groups. And the population of Libya largely supported Gaddafi against them. So many examples of this. Every U.S. military intervention begins with a lie. Over and over and over again, they have lied their way into wars. They lied in the Spanish-American War. Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain. The USS Maine was not sunk by the Spanish. It was sunk by mechanical failures. Spain had nothing to do with it. It was a lie. With the Lusitania, they said, oh, the Germans just randomly attacked an American ship, the Lusitania, and that's why we have to go into World War I. Turned out that ship was actually smuggling weapons to the British. It was carrying military hardware. It was a military target. They said the North Korea attacked South Korea. But in reality, the USA had overthrown the democratic government of South Korea, installed a military dictator who was then slaughtering and murdering the people of South Korea who protested wanting free elections. And so South Korea intervened to protect their country folk from being slaughtered. So many examples of this. So many examples of this. The Gulf of Tonkin incident. The Gulf of Tonkin incident. They said that the North Vietnamese had attacked a U.S. ship, and they didn't, and it was a lie. The U.S. invasion of Grenada was supposedly to rescue a bunch of medical students. Ronald Reagan saw that this communist regime was oppressing some medical students, and it wasn't. That was a lie. The U.S. invasion of Panama. They said that Noriega and the Panamanian government had attacked U.S. troops. And they hadn't. The U.S. troops had deliberately provoked them and ran at them and done a situation where they were provoked into shooting back. They basically thought they were being shot at, and so they shot back, and then they used that as the excuse to overthrow the government of Panama. There was the infamous Naria testimony with Iraq, with the woman on TV crying, the babies, and it was all a lie. It was staged. It was a hoax. Iraq was not taking babies out of incubators. The U.S. Gulf War intervention in Kuwait was based on a lie. In addition to that, you had the Bill Clinton's intervention in Serbia, also based on a lie, claiming that Serbia was committing genocide against ethnic Albanians. That was a lie. You had the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, supposedly because the Taliban wouldn't turn over bin Laden. Turns out they did. They were willing to turn over bin Laden. They just wanted to follow their own court system. The USA said no because it wanted to invade. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Gaddafi was not handing out Viagra to rape women. These were all lies. These were all false flags, fake news. These were all lies. U.S. wars begin with lies. And they have done this over and over and over and over and over. Over and over and over again, they have lied to justify their wars. Over and over and over again. Over and over and over again, they have lied to justify their wars. And they've even tried false flags recently. A couple of years ago, the Venezuelan right wing, the U.S.-backed forces that want to bring down the Venezuelan government, they were in Colombia, and they had a food caravan that was going to Venezuela. It was going to deliver food into Venezuela. And they lit their own food caravan on fire and tried to blame it on Venezuela in the hopes that the USA could invade Venezuela because they lit the food caravans on fire. When video clearly showed, and the New York Times and others were supposed to admit, no, the right-wing Venezuelans lit their own food caravan on fire because they were hoping to justify a U.S. military intervention against Venezuela. They lit their own food caravan on fire, and they were caught doing it. There was video to show that they were doing it. You remember this? When they lit their own food caravan on fire in the hopes of selling a war. There have been all these claims about chemical weapons in Syria that have been debunked. There have been emails proving that UN weapons inspectors don't buy the allegation that Assad is killing his own people with chemical weapons. They don't buy it. And there have been many, 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 many examples of the U.S. government accusing Syria of using chemical weapons, and then afterwards the whole story falls apart. Meanwhile, everyone admits that the rebels that were backed by the United States against the Syrian Arab Republic were using chemical weapons. The whole time, everyone knew that al-Nusra and the various terrorist groups trying to overthrow the Syrian government had used chemical weapons. They'd been caught doing it over and over and over again. So there's so many examples of U.S. military interventions and U.S. wars beginning with blatant lies. And there's been a lot of attempted false flags and attempted lies lately. So that is why Russia is so concerned about this nuclear power plant. They're concerned about it because nuclear weapons, nuclear chemical explosions, folks can remember Chernobyl, that stuff is not a joke. The last thing Russia would ever want was there to be some kind of disaster at Zaporozhye. But right now, U.S. media is playing up the idea that Russia is going to do something. And they're playing up that idea because it looks like they're planning to do something. They're planning some kind of false flag provocation in the hopes they can justify bringing the USA in to do what the Ukrainian military is incapable of doing. It's pretty awful. And we should take this seriously. Yes, every U.S. war begins with a lie, and they've lied so many times. So many times. And after they lie, there's they'll admit they lied. Newspapers will run stories about it. The New York Times, admitted that the Naria testimony for the Gulf War was fake. The whole world knows there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Amnesty International and other organizations confirmed that no, Gaddafi was not handing out Viagra so his soldiers could rape women. All of these lies, they admit them now. But it's too late. And what bothers me, what annoys me, is that there are people I know who have lived through this. They've lived through these various wars, and they believed it every time. They believed it every time. And I think you all know people like this too, that, they believed that the Taliban was not going to turn over bin Laden. They believed that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. They believed Gaddafi was killing his own people. They believed Milosevic was committing genocide. People. I know people who, and then afterwards, you'll show them, and they'll go, "Oh wow, they lied," but then they're all ready to believe the next one, and it's frustrating. It's very, very frustrating to see people not be able to notice this pattern. Every U.S. war begins with a lie. Every single U.S. war and military intervention that we've seen begins with a lie. And they have lied over and over and over again. And they'll even admit they lied afterwards. And that's why we should all be very, very concerned about what's going on in this situation with this power plant. World War III is not a joke. Nuclear weapons and nuclear-related confrontations are not a joke. And I think most of humanity recognizes, but there is a deranged wing of our ruling class that I am convinced might be considering some kind of nuclear provocation, some kind of nuclear war. And that is something to be very, very disturbed by. You could have a nuclear war by accident right now. There could be confusion. There could be mixed signals. Scott Ritter has talked about this many times. There could be confusion. There could be mixed signals. Somebody could think one thing is another thing, and we could have nuclear war. It's very, very dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. And the fact that so many of the nuclear treaties that were signed at the end of the Cold War as the Soviet Union was falling, so many of those treaties have been ripped up. The INF Treaty, the Clear Skies Agreement. So many of these nuclear treaties have just been ripped up and destroyed. And now we've got provocations happening around this power plant, this nuclear power plant in Donbass. This is a very serious situation. This is a very, very serious situation. We already saw that the Ukrainian forces backed by the United States blew up a hydroelectrical power plant, a dam to create a flood. They bombed a dam in order to create a flood. Terrorist tactics. What else might they do? This is something we should all take very, very seriously. And it is extremely frustrating to me. Extremely frustrating to me that there are many people who just can't get it through their heads that the U.S. government and the U.S. media lie in order to get us into war. You don't have to be a communist to recognize this. Lots of libertarians recognize this. Lots of pacifists recognize this. The historical record is unequivocal. U.S. wars begin with lies. Biden bombed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. That's basically an acknowledged fact at this point. They lie. The U.S. imperialists, they lie. And that's why they want to shut down any debate. And that's why they want to censor media. This is just being a socialist 101, in my view. During the Iraq War days, everyone who called themselves a socialist knew about this. They knew about how the U.S. wars had begun with lies. They knew about this. And what's very disturbing is that now there are so many people on the left that think whatever U.S. mainstream media says about Russia must be true. Why? Because they say Russia's right wing. What does right wing mean? What does right wing mean? They can't tell you. And Russia has a national health care service. Russia has paid maternity leave. How is Russia right wing? It's got more of a welfare state than the United States does. An interesting question, Funky, but I wrote it down. Not quite sure what you're getting at there, but there's so many examples of them lying in order to get us into wars. So many examples. So many examples. I just listed a bunch of them for you right there. And the fact that anyone believes what they're saying about Russia, believes what they're saying about China, you can't believe them. And I was just talking to somebody the other day about Dr. Bruce Cummings. Now, do folks know who Dr. Bruce Cummings is? Dr. Bruce Cummings is the most well-respected scholar of Korean history in the United States. I believe he's based in Illinois, University of Illinois. He's the author of several very good books, Korea's Place in the Sun, North Korea, Another Country. He's not a communist or a Marxist, but he is the first to tell you, as the most respected and the most qualified scholar of Korean history in the United States, that the way they talk about North Korea in American media is bull honking. Remember, he came to my university when I was a college student, came and spoke. And he said in his remarks that he's frequently called by ABC News, NBC News, Fox News, and asked to verify claims about North Korea. Do they really have the world's largest collection of pornography? Are millions of people starving to death while Kim Jong-un lives in a palace? He's frequently asked these things. And he says, no, I have no way of verifying that. What's your source on this? And they always say, oh, it's just an anonymous source within the South Korean military or within South Korean intelligence. And he says, well, that's not credible at all. They've said all kinds of false things about North Korea. But he still sees them in print. They will still print these blatantly untrue, unfact-checked, wild claims about North Korea. They say all kinds of crazy things about North Korea. That in North Korea, they claim Kim Jong-un invented the hamburger. No, they don't. They claim Kim Jong-un hit a hole-in-one the first time he ever played golf. No, they don't. These things are just lies. These are just lies that they tell in American media. Yeah, there's fireworks going off behind me. They've been going off for 2 hours now. Good night. They just lie about North Korea all the time. All the time. They just make things up about North Korea. And people look into it, and it's bull honky. There's many other examples of this. There's so many examples of them just lying, of them just making stuff up to justify their wars. Many, many, many examples. Many, many examples of them just lying to justify their wars. Many, many examples. And I think those of us who know this have a responsibility to tell our friends, to tell our family, to make sure they don't get away with it. Because I feel like people are more skeptical of the war lobby than ever before. Polls show that Americans are opposed to interventions around the world more strongly than ever before. And it's our job to make sure that this public that's already predisposed to oppose wars and interventions, it's our job to make sure that they get reminded of how many times the U.S. media has lied and why these military provocations and false flags are not to be believed. I think it's very important. I think it's very, very, very important. So that's what I wanted to spend my opening remarks doing, just going over the various conflicts that have happened. But I have a special request here. Shout out to you, Peter, if you're watching. Peter requested that I show a clip of the Black Panther Huey Newton when he appeared on national television. And I'm going to do that. I will play that clip here in a minute. But this is actually kind of related. It's kind of related to what I've been talking about on these streams. I've been talking about false flag operations to justify war. Well, now I'm going to tell you that U.S. government repression at home also begins with false flag operations and lies. Many people now know, many people now are aware of the fact that Fred Hampton, the leader of the Black Panther Party, was murdered by the American government. But what did the newspaper in Chicago say the day after Fred Hampton was killed? What was the headline? Vicious Panther attack. When the U.S. government murdered Fred Hampton, the newspapers said that the Black Panthers were responsible. The headline in the Chicago Tribune was Vicious Panther attack, 2 left dead. Well, the 2 who were dead were Mark Clark and Fred Hampton, 2 Black Panthers. They were the ones who were left dead. And actually, there's other examples of this. Waco. Go and read the facts about Waco. Lori Spencer can tell you everything you need to know about Waco. This religious group, the Branch Davidians in Waco, kind of a wacky religious group. Not everything they did was defensible, but they didn't deserve to die. They did not deserve to die. And the U.S. government murdered this interracial religious group, murdered them inside their compound, firebombed the compound, killed them. And for years tried to claim that it was a mass suicide, tried to claim that somehow they'd killed themselves. It was a lie. The U.S. government had laid siege to their compound in Waco, Texas, and then it dropped a bomb on them and killed them. killed children, killed innocent people. It was a horrendous incident. In Philadelphia, there was a religious group called the Move Organization. They did a similar thing to them. They dropped a bomb on their house. They firebombed their house. Flammable tear gas. And they said, they had illegal weapons. They blah, 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 blah. They lied to justify that. So the heavy-handed repression of the American government against people that challenge its narratives, people who oppose them, and the wars around the world that they have waged are both justified with media propaganda and lies. And we have to remember this. I'm sitting here and I'm just telling you over and over again all the times they've lied. You have to remember this. Now, the request is that I show this clip of, since it's the 4th of July, of Huey Newton, founder of the Black Panthers, and the way his conversation with William F. Buckley began. Because William F. Buckley was this extreme conservative. And this is how the interview between Black Panther Huey Newton and William F. Buckley went. So here we go. Blah, blah, blah.
In 1966, the Black Panther movement was founded. Prominent among the founders were Bobby Seale, who is its president, and Huey Newton, after Eldridge Cleaver, probably its best-known champion. In recent months, of course, the Newton wing expelled Eldridge Cleaver, who is living in Algeria, so that the Seale-Newton wing is nowadays supreme. Meanwhile, the Black Panthers have turned their backs officially on violence as a means of accomplishing whatever it is they propose to accomplish, concerning which we will in due course be enlightened.
Now,
Huey Newton.
Just a quick second here. Let's just go over what he's referring to there. So this must be from like 1969 or 1970. The Black Panther Party was heavily infiltrated by the FBI. It really exploded in membership 1967, 68, 69. Heavily infiltrated by the FBI. And there were two prominent leaders of the Black Panther Party. You had Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, who had started the Black Panther Party, and Huey Newton, who we're about to watch here. Huey Newton was the ideological leader of the Black Panther Party. Bobby Seale worked closely with him. But there was a prisoner named Eldridge Cleaver. Eldridge Cleaver had been doing time in prison, and he'd started writing articles for Ramparts magazine, which was like a radical magazine from the Bay Area. From prison, he wrote like very eloquent articles. He was in prison for rape, and he wrote very eloquent articles that were published for Ramparts magazine. They eventually compiled them into a book called Soul on Ice. So Eldridge Cleaver was released from prison, and Eldridge Cleaver joined the Black Panther Party, and he became kind of a rival to Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. So there was a split in the Black Panther Party, and the East Coast wing of the Black Panther Party went with Eldridge Cleaver, and the West Coast wing of the Black Panther Party went with Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. And so there was a split. And actually, for a while at the time, they referred to, in the writing, I've seen like places they referred to the Black Panther Party, parenthesis, Newton, the Black Panther Party, parenthesis, Cleaver. I've seen that. And there was a split in the Black Panther Party between the two factions. The basis of the split was that Huey Newton advocated survival pending revolution. He wanted them to set up free breakfast programs, welfare programs. He wanted them to form an alliance with groups of different races and nationalities based on his theory of intercommunalism. Eldridge Cleaver believed in urban guerrilla warfare. He believed in left adventurism and terrorism, illegal confrontations with the U.S. government. And he engaged in provocative criminal activities and fled the country. He went to Cuba, eventually went to North Korea, where his children were born. The 1980s, he moved to France, and then in France, he became a Republican conservative and apologized for everything and came back to the United States and became a conservative. That was Eldridge Cleaver. Huey Newton, he was the leader of the Black Panthers. They kicked out Eldridge Cleaver, and they continued to push for survival pending revolution. So this is an interview with Huey Newton, but that's to put some context into that history that William F. Buckley just gave there before the interview.
Rambo was tried and convicted of killing a policeman, specifically of involuntary manslaughter. The slogan, Free Huey Newton, was to the late 60s what the slogan, Who Promoted Perez, was to the early 50s. The higher court reversed the verdict on a technicality, and Mr. Newton was tried twice more, the trial resulting in each case in a split jury. Finally, the presiding judge gave up, and Huey Newton is free. His mother is from Louisiana, his father from Arkansas, and he is the youngest of 7 children. He was schooled in Oakland, where he now lives. His first book was called To Die for the People, and imminently he will publish his autobiography, which is called Revolutionary Suicide, a concept I shall now ask Mr. Newton please to explain.
I'll explain it, but if I may impose upon you, I have a friend who's almost dying for me to ask this question, if you will. The question is, during the Revolution of 1776, when the United States of America broke away from England, my friend would like to know, what side would you have been on during that time?
I think probably I would have been on the side of George Washington. I'm not absolutely sure, because it remains to be established historically whether what we sought to prove at that point might not have been proved by more peaceful means. On the whole, I'm against revolutions. Though I think as revolutions go, that was a pretty humane one.
Yeah, you're not such a bad guy after all. My friend will be surprised to hear that. I hope he's listening.
Yes, that's why we had this special request to play this clip. Shout out to Peter, who made the request for the 4th of July. But we'll continue this interview for a little bit. Why not, right? If people have more super chats, send them my way. We'll answer them in the second half of the show. But we'll have fun with this for a little bit.
His assumption was what?
Well, he was puzzled, but I think that he was inclined to believe that you've been on the side of the colonizers of England. But I'm pleased with the answer. And I agree with you. The only revolution that is worth fighting is a humane revolution. And
Also one that succeeds.
Pardon me?
Also one that succeeds.
Yes, right,
Because,
eventually.
I feel that if King George had captured George Washington, he would have had the right to hang him.
According to the law.
Yeah.
But revolutions always, in some ways, contradict some laws. That's why it's called revolution.
Well, revolutionary justice is its own justice, isn't it?
Yes, and of course it always professes to go under some human right or humane consideration. And I think that we can judge revolutions on the basis of how much, in fact, or objectively, people are given a fair, dealt with in a fairer way, and are given more freedom. I think that one of my principles is that contradiction is the ruling principle of the universe, and everything in phenomena, whether it's the physical world or the biological world or the social world, has its internal contradiction that gives motion to things, that internal strain. And much of the time that we Homo sapiens don't realize that no matter what sort of conditions we establish, no matter what government we establish at this point, there also will be that internal contradiction that will have to be resolved, and resolved in a rational, just way. And of course, that leads us somewhat, it's very vague on how to deal with it. And many times we claim actions are revolutionary, when really they're not.
Yeah, now that just went way over the head of middle America. And that's one thing that many people have said about Huey Newton. Huey Newton was a genius tactically. I mean, he developed the Black Panther Party, their tactics, he organized them. He spent a lot of time studying philosophy. He spent a lot of time studying Marxist Leninist theory. And he was a brilliant organizer and a brilliant visionary. He really knew how to build an organization. But he was not meant for prime time, right? I mean, if you go on national TV and you're being seen by middle America, and the way he's talking there about he's talking very quickly in that clip we just watched. I mean, he was talking about dialectical materialism and contradiction in the universe. And, you know, a lot of people were just probably sitting there in front of their TVs going, what? You know, you have to have different speeds, right? Yeah, as a revolutionary, you have to know the difference between agitation and propaganda. Propaganda is for the advanced, agitation is for the masses, right? And propaganda, when you only have limited time and you're speaking to a huge audience, you want to use agitation, because agitation is just, you talk about the injustice that exists, you lay it out there, you know. And then more advanced ideological stuff is for people that are already won over. But he was a brilliant man, absolutely. We'll keep watching this. This is an important historical piece.
So I appreciate your answer, and I would agree with that part of it.
Which part?
The part that the only revolution is worthwhile, or that is a real revolution that succeeds, would be a humane revolution. And
otherwise, it's called an insurrection or a mutiny.
Yeah, a rebellion or riot. Yes.
Yeah, as I understand it, the generally accepted test of the integrity of a revolution is whether it is established, the revolution having taken place, that the people truly supported it.
A revolution cannot really succeed without the people's support.
Oh, sure it can. Sure. It's easy.
Well, changes in authority can be successful. But I think that we would have to have a functional definition. We would have to stipulate what we mean by revolution.
Well, there are revolutions, roughly speaking, every 2 or 3 months in Latin America without the people getting involved.
Well, I would probably call it by, I think just the words, I would call it a coup d'etat.
That's revolution.
Well, I say that by way of definition, I would reject your definition. But I'll appreciate if you want to call a coup d'etat a revolution, then I could function.
All right, and if you want to call a popular revolution, please call it a popular revolution.
Well, then I would say that a revolution would have to be popular, or else I wouldn't label it as a revolution. I would, so really we're just dealing in semantics of what a revolution what a revolution is made up of, in fact. And I say that we won't have to belabor that. Any rebellion that establishes a new authority, if you would like to call that revolution, then I could entertain it, because you know, it's just a word anyway. But changes in governments and changes in the relationship people and authority and institutions, I say they take many forms, and I like to distinguish.
Sure. What would you call the thing that ousted King Farouk?
I wouldn't call it a revolution.
Even though an entirely new order was brought in?
Yes, but with coup d'etats, it's common that an entirely new order will be brought in.
No, not necessarily.
Pardon me? I say it's possible.
No, sometimes a coup d'etat takes away one kernel and puts in another
but
kernel.
Sometimes, but other times that a coup d'etat could establish an entirely different relationship between the institutions and the people in a particular place.
In which case it's revolutionary.
Pardon me?
In which case it's revolutionary.
I say that I could function with that definition if you insist that's the only one, but I have a special, to me, revolution carries a special connotation, and of course it's only my subjective kind of feelings about it, and but I have to distinguish between changes of power and just for my own way of thinking, establish calling one a flower and the other a skunk. And but I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't argue the absolute kind of definition to you know, the conditions that I'm talking about.
Well, I grant that you have considerable authority in your movement. I I'm not sure that you have an authority to impose your own terminology.
Well, I argue that your definition is not necessarily a lexical definition. I already granted you, if you want to stipulate that that as a definition of revolution, I'll entertain it. But
well, maybe this is the occasion to say about the historian Macaulay that he shouldn't have referred to the Glorious Revolution of 1688 because it didn't fit your standard. But
well,
meanwhile, he wrote 13 volumes on the subject
I say that he
and
could
called it a
refer.
revolution.
Well, he could refer to it any way he likes.
He did.
And I say that if we want to appreciate his,
he wasn't an imperialist, was he?
I say if we want to appreciate his definition, fine. I'm not attempting to stipulate a new definition. There are authorities that I could cite that would call a revolution a very special thing. One authority would be the scholar, philosopher, Chairman Mao Zedong. They would only call a people's movement and the overthrow of the authority by the proletarians a revolution. But I wouldn't argue, I wouldn't support Chairman Mao against you in saying that that is the only definition. Unfortunately, with the English language, or the especially with the American language, that's a little different from the English language. It's a pretty vague thing, and you have so many lexical definitions that directly contradict each other. I don't think that we should belabor our audience talking about who has the authority to define a particular phenomena.
Well,
again, he just blew Middle America's mind. Buckley is trying to kind of keep him on this argument about words and what their meaning is, and to try and avoid the issues at hand, to try and avoid him saying things that could really kind of fire people up. But it is still amazing. I mean, that Huey Newton was a brilliant philosopher and speaker, and he had such a deep knowledge and eloquence about these kind of topics. I mean, he sounds way smarter than any of the so-called Marxists on the internet these days. I'll tell you that much.
Not unless we want to. We
yes,
always can.
Do we want to? If you want to, then I want to. Then I will be done. Huh?
As you no doubt know, the use of the word people,
yes,
the use of the term popular support,
yes,
is done by Chairman Mao, as you referred to him in your book, with some sense of proprietorship. That is to say, he's always talking about the people,
yes,
desiring this, that,
yes.
and the other. The people are, in fact, never consulted about anything. Have never been consulted about Chairman Mao, about any of his regulations, or about his foreign policy.
Well, I differ with you. I think that too much of the time, because of our cultural differences, and that we only consider being consulted within the scope of what we feel subjectively being consulted is all about. For instance, in China as well as in Latin America, people say that, well, there's no democracy, say, in Cuba because there's no putting the ballot in the box, so the people are not consulted. But on the other hand, that Fidel Castro said that the people are consulted even in a more severe way, that the authorities put to the acid test. And whether I support that procedure or not is not the point. But the acid test is for a long time that people can be fooled, but they can't be fooled and misused all of the time. And the test would be the doom of your authority through armed revolution, and that is the way that they're consulted in the final analysis.
I don't know what you're talking about, and I think you don't either.
Well, I'll tell you. Well, you can only speak for yourself.
That's why I say I think.
I say that I'm perfectly equipped to. I'll be more clear then. Okay.
Yeah. You were going to explain wherein Castro is democratic.
No, I'm going to explain a principle, and the principle is how people are consulted in a democratic society. And I'm saying that the Westerners have a particular definition of people voting, a particular definition of what democracy is about. And I can appreciate that definition. In other words, it doesn't matter whether I accept it or not for now. But here in the West, we feel that the only time that people are given democratic rights to have a say-so is when you put the ballot in the box and you vote for
No,
a
not
particular
necessarily.
person
No.
within a particular framework.
The answer is not necessarily.
No, I said,
It is,
well,
wait a minute.
let me finish
I'm on
my
this program.
proposition.
No.
Let me finish.
Not
I
until-
insist.
not until-
I'm your guest,
Yeah.
and I heard that you're a charming
That's
man,
right, and I'm
that
the
you're
host.
polite. I don't have. Hold. Wait just one minute.
It isn't merely a matter of voting.
Hold just one
It's a
minute.
matter of expressing
I don't
yourself.
have to be. I don't have to be polite and charming because it's not my program. You owe me a special privilege. What I'm saying is that sometimes that people are heard and people participate with their say-so, and it could be called democracy because it's who defines democracy. Now, in the West, much of the time, if you're not allowed to vote by putting the ballot into the box and choosing an administration or a person, if this does not take place, then in the West we're inclined to say there's no democracy. I'm saying this is not necessarily true if democracy will be defined as everyone and all of the people getting a fair share and the fairest deal of whatever wealth is there, and some control over their administrators. Now, in armed revolution, the people are casting the ballots, certainly. And this is the acid test that some say, well, it's no need for them to go to deal in bourgeois democracy because even in the West, they say democracy, but you can't vote out private property. You can only vote within the scope of the definition of the institutions and the people and the authority who control them. And some other countries,
okay, now hold.
And some other, I'll let you talk in 1 minute, Ernest.
Go ahead.
In some other countries, they say, no, the people will decide what happens, and they're not relegated or bound by any definition by the interests of the authority, if it happens to be a bourgeois authority, and I mean owners, and those who control most of the wealth. I would have to appreciate if they call that the flower, I would say flower also. Now, whether we choose that form of that procedure or not, that would have to be considered by our own subjective kind of desire. And I will agree that with human affairs, that most of the times we call our subjective desires objective. I try not to do that. And this is why that I try to be very honest in debates and just in discussions. Right.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
You are charming and you're very polite.
And very silent. The right of the individual to define for himself George Orwell wrote a very famous book based on Big Brother's attempt so to rob words of their meanings that war became peace and justice became oppression and so on. Now,
Fireworks.
Democracy consists not only in being permitted to vote, but in being permitted to organize an opposition.
Yes.
So as to discover whether people are latently on your side. There is no practice of democracy as commonly understood in Cuba. The assumption that an organization is democratic because otherwise the leader would be overthrown is naive.
There's one fallacy in what I think that you would consider democracy. You could only organize an opposition within the scope as defined by the authorities who are in control in the first place. And this is true in the socialist society as well as in the capitalist society.
Give me an example.
An example is this. In this society, that you're not allowed to organize an opposition against the authority through armed resistance with the intent to overthrow the government.
That's right.
So therefore, but
we call that rebellion.
By law, but you've already agreed that if you were in 1776, you probably would have chose Washington, and this definitely would have been against the law. And so I'm saying when we talk about, I'm saying that when we talk about organizing opposition, that no government in this world that I know about have the audacity at this point in the human being's limited freedom to organize an opposition against the authority any way he likes. So, but you have certain.
I don't understand you. If you want to organize an opposition
Yes.
In the United States, short of killing people.
Yes. Well,
As I understand it,
right there, short of killing people. Why do
Yeah.
you say that?
Well, because those are the rules.
Those are the. This
Yeah.
is just what I'm saying. So
You see,
therefore, you have to operate within a limited
The,
scope.
the
limited to some
rules of
point.
democracy are that the art of persuasion has to be practiced short of
No,
assassination.
I understand that, but I want to be clear to you. It's also the same principle operating in socialist or communist
How?
governments.
Give me an example.
You're allowed.
Where?
Well, let's choose for
Czechoslovakia. How about
example,
Czechoslovakia?
let's choose the People's Republic of China.
All right. What are you allowed to do?
You're allowed to organize opposition.
No, you're not.
Against.
No, you're not.
But we disagree in fact
Well,
now. And that's a real
tell me one
contradiction.
authority on China who says you can. Name one.
Well, we could start with.
Start with anybody.
Pardon me?
Start with anybody.
Oh, start with Chou En-lai.
When did he say you could organize an opposition?
Oh, well, I'll tell you when. When I spoke to him in the People's Republic of China, that I had about 6 hours private talk with him, and I had many hours of talk with responsible members of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. And I was very shocked because I suddenly realized, and I was sort of ashamed too, that I was brainwashed by Western thought, because what I heard, I didn't think that no matter, before I went, I would have lied to you and said, oh, you have freedom of speech in China. You know, deep down, because I believe that they were moving towards.
How can you organize opposition without freedom of speech?
Let me finish. If you interrupt before I finish the idea, then we'll talk about contrary things, and we won't have the contradiction that we're attempting to have anyway. I'm saying that as I sat there, this Chinese said that, you know, comrade, that all state administrations are oppressive to someone. And he started to explain in capital state that the people who own the capital, they're a minority, and they oppress the majority of the people through exploitation. You know, you call rhetoric. I was listening. And he said that in national state, that sometimes a whole nation will oppress the rest of the world, and with their state national administration. So there's still a minority oppressing the majority of the world's people, like the Hitler regime attempted to do, and like this regime attempted to do to a point. Let me finish. Let me finish. I haven't gotten to the meat. I insist that I give you the antidote. So what I thought was so. Let's not do this, all right? What I thought was so shocking was this last statement. And I'll be very brief, and I'll talk fast. That he said that. I said that. Well, comrade, what about you? Said, oh. State administration, what about the communists? What about your progressive socialist state? Is that also oppressive? And then he said, yes. He said that while you have state administration, that we expropriate from the people, because if the people in this country, if they earn $10 an hour, we only give them $8. The only difference in us and the capitalist state is that our appropriation is different. That we don't have private ownership, so we give that $2 we expropriated from the people back in the general welfare in the capital state, that they give it to themselves in their pocket. So therefore the people are still not as free as we'd like for them to be. They say we work for the dissolution of the state. We work for our own disappearance. And when he said that, I said sedition. He works for the end of the communist regime of China. And I thought that was very honest. I met so much honesty there. And I thought that was a very free statement. And that's a statement that would lead me to believe that if he's working for the dissolution of the state, that an opposition could arise to work for that withering away of territorial boundary lines. When China, as Russia has already done, strays from this philosophy, I will stray from my respect for them. The United States is, as far as the West is concerned, that there are many democratic principles that the people in China probably don't enjoy, according to what you would call democratic principles. And
Look,
I
Mr.
say,
Newton, hang on a second.
and I say
Hang on a
this
second.
is
This is not going to go on as monologue.
Oh, all right. You're fair. I'll let you
Yeah,
talk.
it's not going to go as monologue. Now,
Fairness begets fairness.
yeah, sure.
Right.
I'm attempting to pin down a point, and I'm losing track of it.
You think
It may be that one of the difficulties you have as chief spokesman for the Black Panther Party
I have many.
is your total incoherence. That is to say, people don't understand what you're talking about. I don't understand what you're talking about, and I'm a very close
you see,
listener.
I think you're very limited in your definition of things. Perhaps you don't understand, but we do have an audience here, and we have an audience throughout the country.
That's right. You've had an audience for 6 years, and you have 2,000 members.
I think that only through empirical evidence, the observation experience, I'll let the people judge whether I'm incoherent or not.
Yeah.
Now, whether I'm incoherent and I could be tested right now, did anyone here understand me? You're allowed to speak. Huh? Sometime I do. Thank you. Well, sometime I do speak in a conglomeration of gibberish. I'm not very schooled in the technique, but that you have here.
Now,
but
listen,
I am
listen,
schooled. I am schooled in honesty.
Why don't we not
and,
talk about your limitations or my limitations?
Well, you brought them up. I wasn't going to spare you and not tell you that sometimes you lose your shirt and your suit.
Yeah.
But you do that, and I hope that you don't do it too often. I'm glad you found it.
Let's see if we can isolate one point. It went as follows.
You're not getting frustrated,
I'll recapitulate. No.
I like talking to you.
I'm glad you do. You're manifesting. We are trying to isolate the question whether there is a right to organize opposition within China. You said, after all,
that's not what
I said, who agrees with you that there is? You said Zhou Enlai.
Mm-hmm.
You then proceeded to tell me what Zhou Enlai said to you in a way that didn't actually
I could tell you other
communicate
names, Comrade Wigway, Comrade Tung, Comrade Lee. You would know the difference. I named a person that you probably are familiar with. They say that you're well-read and you're conscious of world events, so I only named one of the officials in China so that you could identify him. And I don't know how many officials you know, and certainly you don't know the people. I doubt if you've been to the villages, the countryside of China, or have you? I think I heard that you did go. Did you go?
Are you aware of the message that
Have you been to
Zhou
China?
Enlai? Yes, I have. Are you aware of the message that Zhou Enlai sent to Allende?
Did you go?
Are
Did you go with? Pardon me?
Are you aware?
Yes,
of the,
I saw the letter.
And you remember that he said that he does not believe that Marxism can be ushered in via parliamentary democracy. In other words, Zhou Enlai, in that particular statement, said that he does not believe in the right to organize an opposition, that it is contrary to the dialectic of Marxism.
Well, but actually, hold just 1 minute. I would like to make this clear, and for the audience and for yourself. I don't know about Zhou Enlai, but one thing that I'm not a Marxist. Not a Marxist. I think that the whole concept of what Marx tried to lay down as a scholar, a historian, a philosopher, was distorted, and people became priests of Marx and of other people. I'm not. I think that Marx was a scientist, and he tried to point out a very advanced method of analyzing phenomena that was called dialectical materialism. And you can't usher in dialectical materialism because that's the whole order and process that the universe goes through. In other words, I explained one of the principles is that contradiction is the ruling principle of the universe. It gives motion to matter, and contradiction is based upon internal strife. And that internal strife between inside of any physical thing seems to give it the ability to move and to be transformed. And societies are people, or my fellow revolutionaries, who think that you can usher in a social order through any sort of ideological proclamation. They're very wrong. The society itself strains to fight against colonialism, such as America did with England. And then after that, you get a situation where workers, the unions, they struggle against the owners of the factories, and then you come up with some other sort of order, and it's much different than the formalities of the ballot. You don't know where it's really going to land until you become such a scientist, the people, till they can harness the forces that are in operation and set them in a direction that's most desirable.
Why don't we get a little bit more concrete, if you don't mind? Let's talk about the Black Panther movement. Those who want your...
I like to argue theory with you probably better than factual things.
Well, yeah, but I'm a little bit more interested in factual things.
I thought you were a theoretician.
People who want your corrections on Marx can read your book.
I haven't seen any of your programs, and I'm sorry you read my book, and I'm embarrassed. I haven't ever read anything that you've done. So you probably know more about me than I know about you as a person. And but I was inclined to believe that you
I said factual, not personal things. I don't want to talk about personal things.
Well, I mean, I was inclined to believe that you were a thinker, somewhat of a scholar, and a theoretician. But I'm usually wrong about those things.
Well, I'm also a yachtsman, which does mean that we're here to discuss boats.
I don't know anything about the facts of boats.
Let's talk about the...
So I could talk to you about that, but I know something about theory.
Yeah, well, let's talk about let's talk about your practical knowledge. Why did you feel it necessary to expel Eldridge Cleaver?
Of course, first that he left the party, and we thought that it was a good time for him to leave because in organizations, parties, and companies, you get very bright, articulate people, and they have great influence upon others, and people are impressed. And I've learned not to follow my first impression as I used to when I was younger. And but when you get a person in who's articulate, bright, eloquent, and also very hurt because of the oppression that he's gone through and driven somewhat sick, too sick to be in that position, but yet with great influence, he leads the whole administration, the whole organization down the drain.
By doing what? What was it that led you down the drain?
Well, when the party started in October 1966 in Oakland, we had the occasion as a strategy to arm ourselves in a police alert patrol where we would follow the police. We were very careful to follow city ordinance about gun regulation and state law and constitutional right. And but we realized it wasn't a principle of revolution or a principle of the party that you pick up the gun now, and the gun was the only thing that defined revolution. So it was a strategy that was mistook after I went to prison with Eldridge's influence, that the gun was not only the symbol of revolution, it was a revolution. So the rhetoric then only pointed not to our programs where we attempted to organize the communities, the black community in particular, so that we could create what was destroyed through our slavery so many years ago, and that's that comprehensive collection of institutions that we call community. We wanted to establish this, and we had to treat the issues that the people were most concerned about. Now, after I went to prison, then with his influence and much of the respect that I personally gave him, so it's my fault also, that the media, they enjoyed the big sensationalism of the gun this, the gun that. So in many ways that we set ourselves up for the murder that we received, and the violations we received upon our person. And the people then were afraid, no, this is not what we want, when we were not about that anyway. So these are things that we have to live with. Those are the mistakes, and one of the mistakes and one of the contradictions we have with our organization, but you have it with any. You have to be very careful and not be too swayed by just the eloquence of a person, that he should not have ever arrived at that position, which I personally appointed him to shortly after he had gotten out of Folsom Prison. And so Eldridge Cleaver I accept him as mainly my responsibility, that I contributed so much to almost the destruction of our party and so many fallen comrades who are now in their grave or in prison. These are the things that I have to live with.
Now, so your point is that his emphasis on the need to use arms damaged the public image of the Black Panther
And the
Party.
effectiveness in organizing the community, because only the people make change that sometimes I call revolution, that all an organization or party can be is a vehicle or a spark to get popular support, and then the people carry out changes such as they desire. And your organization, of course, will be ineffective if your spark is in the wrong direction. If that's in left field and the wheat is in right field, then you get no place. But then you could have the spark in the same field, and the spark then will be consumed by the enthusiasm of the people, and the organization will become less important.
Now, if
So
Eldridge Cleaver were to return to this country and challenge your leadership, are you quite confident that you would win any test of popularity against him?
Well, many people who consider me a leader, really, we probably could argue about that, what that means. If it means what most people, especially my friends, think that it means, or I think that they entertain the meeting, I reject that. I'm not a leader. I view myself as somewhat of an organizer, as humble as I may be, that I've learned how to start to organize people so that they can protest, and they can somehow get what they want. And of course, that I only indulge with those people where I have a subjective support for them in the first place.
Righty. All righty. Well, if you want to watch the whole interview, we watched well over the first half there. You want to watch the whole interview, you can watch it here. This is the link to the full interview. It was quite entertaining and quite refreshing to hear. It was quite a sophisticated conversation there. I was blown away by all the references to 1776 and the American Revolution from a positive light, and all of the sophisticated, deep understanding of Marxist philosophy that we heard there. I mean, that must have just blown a lot of people's minds in Middle America, and that shows you that, again, he was thinking on a level that was very, very deep. And that's what enabled him to build the Black Panthers and accomplish what he accomplished. He was thinking on a very, very deep level. And I really appreciate, thank you, Peter, for the suggestion to show this on the stream. I think that was a great insight. We've heard a lot about what revolution means, dialectical materialism, etc. So basically, we're going to do the roll call here in a little bit, and then I'll start answering your super chat questions. We got 8 super chats. Some of them are just little comments, but some of them are questions, but I will answer them I will answer them after the roll call. So be sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. That would be great if you could do that. Why don't we now do the roll call? Let's do the roll call so that we can, at that point, at this next point, we can find out who's on the other side of the camera. Names and locations, who is with us tonight. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations, who is with us. We got Mark in Utica, New York. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Zach Bunch from Richmond, Virginia. Ryan in Kansas City. We got Noah in Boston. Jenny in Cincinnati. Sherry Spector in New Jersey. Steve in Boston. Chester in England. Lori in Oklahoma, who did a great stream last night for Julian Assange. We got Sam from PCUSA. Sherry from Lorton, Virginia. Sao Paulo, that's in Brazil. Jamie in St. Paul. Alex from Brazil. Temple City, California. Patch in Arizona. Chris in Salt Lake City. Jersey, A1 and A2 in Jersey. Joe in New Jersey, home of the revolution. Croaky Bob in Ireland, right? Very, very good. QC from the Philippines to Los Angeles County, USA. Welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We got Keith Preston in Richmond, Virginia. We got Briggy in Pennsylvania. Quay in Lagos, Nigeria. Colin in Greensboro. Chris in Salt Lake City. Welcome, 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 everybody. David Rennie from Hamilton, Ontario. John McCarthy in Oak Park. Shout out to you, John. Shout out to you. You usually say Chicago, but this time you're more specific. There you go. We got Catalonia, Spain. Micah in Las Vegas. Killian in Milwaukee. Remy in Gary, Indiana, near Chicago. Yes, Gary, Indiana is part of Chicagoland. It's an old steel town, an industrial city. There you go. There you go. We got the seasoned noob in China, Jonathan C. in Los Angeles. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you with us. Sarah in Toronto. Glad you're here with us tonight. They got Nick in Tampa. We got Bob Troy in New York. Hanson in Ontario. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Well, just a quick reminder for folks, maybe didn't see before, we are having 2 events in one day in New York City. This is the first one. It'll be at 3 p.m. on Monday. It'll be a protest, peace with Russia, peace with China, no police state. Assemble at 43rd and 6th Avenue at 3 p.m. And later that evening, we'll be having a panel discussion at 4 West 43rd, at 4 West 43rd Street at 7 p.m. Money and American Injustice, How the U.S. Legal System Targets the Poor, with Jose Vega, Chris Halali, and Nick Brana, our special guest attorneys in addition. And yeah, we'd like you to be there. So see you there at the events in New York City. It is going to be awesome. And in addition to that, if you would like to send us a donation to help us have these important events, that's going to be great. It looks like there's going to be, different guests from a lot of important groups and organizations that are going to be there. It's going to be quite a day. July 10th, this coming Monday, is going to be quite a day in New York City. So I hope that you can join us. I really hope you can join us. Send us a donation if you can to help us organize the event. And so now I'm going to start answering your super chat questions. So first we've got Timoshenko. What did you learn from working with Ramsey Clark? Well, Ramsey Clark was quite old when I worked with him. He's not a young man, not a spring chicken, as they say. He was quite old. But what I do remember about Ramsey Clark was that he was very to the point. I do remember asking him at one point, the first time I interviewed him for Press TV, I had a very long, complicated question about foreign policy. And he replied with, "I'm against war." And that was his answer, which I thought was pretty neat. He also, he seemed to understand the power of an individual. And, there were times where I spoke with him where he was very much, hoping that Prachanda of Nepal, would turn out to be a leader. He understood that individuals can have an important role in history. And that seemed to be something he was quite aware of. That he understood that individual leaders could have an impact. One thing that he always seemed to emphasize in a lot of his remarks was the way nuclear weapons are completely devastating. And the people don't seem to realize what one nuke going off could do and how people could die. I will say Ramsey Clark was very opposed to the International Criminal Court, which is a big liberal fixation. George Soros was one of the main backers of the International Criminal Court. It seems like Ramsey Clark, he dedicated his life to opposing the International Criminal Court, to representing the people it tried, whether it was, the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia that went after Slobodan Milosevic, whether it was African leaders. At this point, every leader who has been convicted in the International Criminal Court has been African, and that the UN treaty has no stipulations in it that would make a criminal court, an International Criminal Court legal. The International Criminal Court is a complete violation of international law. The idea that you can just set up some court and say it's the court of the whole world, that is completely in violation of national sovereignty. No country has ever agreed to that. And the United States doesn't even recognize the International Criminal Court. And if the United States doesn't recognize the International Criminal Court and has even put sanctions on the International Criminal Court, how in the world can they be using the International Criminal Court against Russia? One thing that, I mean, I would often deliver things over to Ramsey Clark's apartment. He lived near Union Square, around 12th Street. I think he had kind of a fancy building that he lived in. I would go over there and deliver things. People would send things to our office. I would go over there and deliver. I was a young guy during these years. He took care of his daughter. He had a daughter who was disabled, and he took care of her. He had a daughter who was she was an adult. She was, in her 40s or whatever, and she was disabled, and he made a point of taking care of her. He traveled a lot, and Ramsey Clark, when he traveled very lightly. He would just bring a couple shirts with him. He would get on a plane, he'd go someplace, he would barely bring anything with him. And that's one thing many people who traveled with him noticed, was like, you'd think this is a guy who's a former U.S. Attorney General. He'd bring a whole suitcase, all kinds of suits and ties. And nope, he traveled extremely lightly, 1 or 2 shirts. He'd go on a trip with 1 or 2 shirts with him. That was it. I was a very, very, very simplistic kind of guy. One thing I do know is he had a lot of really deep friendships with a lot of different people. I would go over to his apartment to deliver something, and there would always be somebody there. And often the people that were there were rather prominent individuals, that he would have over there. People who played an important role in the anti-Vietnam War movement, or people who'd been part of the protests around Yugoslavia or whatever. And that he had a lot of people who were whistleblowers or had formerly worked in government, and that he would just, they would come over to visit him, and he would just chat with them, and they would consult with him. That was a lot of what he did, was consult with people. I think there's a lot of people who did important activism against the Iraq War or against the Bush administration, that would go and sit down with Ramsey Clark for a few hours beforehand and just talk to him and get his advice. And he was somebody who knew the behind the scenes situation. He knew what these people were like behind closed doors. He knew what the FBI was like behind closed doors. He knew about these things. He knew what COINTELPRO was like as it was going on. He knew about how, there were wiretappings. He was doing his best to try and restrain the FBI. Fighting with the FBI. And when he was forced out, when Richard Nixon came into office and fired Ramsey Clark, that's when the FBI took off the gloves with COINTELPRO. And that's when Ramsey Clark became a full-on anti-imperialist. He went to North Vietnam. He supported the Vietnamese. And that Ramsey Clark, I don't think he ever called himself a communist. He never used that label, but he denounced capitalism in many of his speeches. He supported, Iraq, Iran, Libya, North Korea, any country that was anti-imperialist, he supported it. He was on their side. He would represent them, and he denounced capitalism, and he denounced war, and he was a hero in so many ways. It's really weird because some of these people that don't like me have tried to make something out of the fact that I used to work with Ramsey Clark. Right. Well, I worked with the International Action Center. I was part of the Workers' World Party. The Workers' World Party were the main staffers of the International Action Center. And I worked with them. I was on staff, and I worked with them, that involved interactions with Ramsey Clark, we set up, press conferences, for Ramsey Clark and things like that. We put together forums where he would speak. We accompanied him sometimes when he traveled, etc. And people try to make that a scandal. Like, I used to work for a former U.S. Attorney General. It's like they forget that this guy became an outspoken advocate of social justice. This person became an outspoken critic of the police state. This guy basically exposed a lot of the COINTELPRO stuff and has revealed a lot of the stuff that's gone on behind the scenes. And, Ramsey Clark was one who got away, as they say. He went from being on their team, on the side of the imperialists, to being on the anti-imperialist team. And I guess when people try to be like, oh my God, a former U.S. Attorney General, this is how the internet gets stupid, right? Look, I'm very critical of the Party of Socialism and Liberation, the PSL, right? Not big fans of theirs. But one thing you'll never hear me denounce them over, ever. I will never bash the PSL over the fact that one of their members is a guy who fought in the Iraq War and then became an Iraq War protester. That's good. The fact that people from the military turn against these wars and become protesters, that's a good thing. That's a very, very good thing. We want that to happen more often. But Michael Preisner is this high-ranking member of the PSL. He's a soldier, former U.S. military guy, who turned against the Iraq War and started leading Iraq Veterans for Peace. Good for him. But I have seen people all over the internet attack PSL for the fact that Mike Preisner is a member. That is the dumbest thing in the world. The dumbest thing I've ever heard. And they're like, oh, they've had former U.S. military people be members. Oh, my God. That's so childish and idiotic. It's a good thing when people who are in the U.S. military turn against it. That's a good thing. And it's like, the fact that Ramsey Clark was the U.S. Attorney General for a couple of years under Lyndon Johnson, and then he turned against U.S. imperialism, became an ally of the forces of resistance around the world. That's awesome. That's awesome. So, I really, these people who don't get it, I mean, it's like we need a lot more Ramsey Clarks. And as the world shifts and as we start moving, and as we move toward multipolarity, et cetera, there are going to be a lot more Ramsey Clarks. There's going to be people that in the power structure who realize the way the wind is blowing. So, and if you're not prepared to have people in the power structure come over to your side, you're not serious about ever taking power. I'll just tell you that much. So there you go. All right. Elena is thanking me for my work. And thank you, Elena, for your support. I do appreciate it. Now, this question from Funky, I don't quite understand it. Don't treaties go against everything capitalism stands for? Are you referring to specific treaties? The UN Declaration of Human Rights, the USA certainly doesn't uphold that. I mean, it says you have the right to a job, the right to housing, the right to health care, and we don't have that in capitalism. Is that what you're referring to? Are you referring to the fact that the market? I don't quite understand what you're getting at with the question. But, there are a number of international treaties that the USA has not recognized that go against the conditions people face in this country and say that our rights are being violated. So that in that sense, maybe that's what you're getting at. In addition to that, the U.S. government routinely goes back on its promises. The Iran nuclear deal ripped up. The improvement of relations with Cuba that happened under Obama rolled back by Trump. The USA, I mean, the Native Americans are the greatest example of that. I mean, every treaty that was ever made with them practically was ripped up and gone back on. Yeah, they do break them. Yes, absolutely, they do break them, and they don't keep their word. That there's no question about that. No question about that. Now, John McCarthy says back then more people actually read Marx, and yeah, I've noticed that. It's weird. Because nowadays, people have a lot more accessibility of information. People have information at their fingertips nowadays, right? You just pull it up on your phone, but yet people don't read like they once did. Older folks tend to know a lot more about Marx and history and world events, even if they're dead wrong, because back then people had more of a feeling that one should be educated about these things. And it's weird because now information is way more accessible, right? We have much more ability to just, if you want a book, you just find the PDF on the internet. Used to be, if you wanted to read a book, you had to go to the library, you had to find a copy of it. Now you just get on the internet, especially if it's Marxist, get on the Marxist Internet Archive, boom, right there in 2 seconds, any book you want to read. But people don't. And that's a weird thing about how our culture has changed, right? That people don't read, even though it's a much easier to read than it once was. And I really do not understand that. I grew up in a library. My mother was a librarian. I walked the picket lines with her in Stark County, Ohio, when there was a library strike. And, I was a kid. I was always in the library, and it was always understood that, if you wanted to learn about something, you should look it up. You should read about it. That's how I grew up, I guess you could say. So there you go. I see your super chat, John, and it's on the list. You're on the list, John. Have no fear. You're on the list. We will definitely get to that one. Very, very good. Next question. If you do a Huey Newton shirt, I'd buy it. Okay. We generally don't do the t-shirt thing at CPI, but we could. I mean, I'm open to it, right? It's funny because it's like, they attack Jimmy Dore for having t-shirts, right? And if you make t-shirts, they immediately attack you for it. Right? They're like, oh, he's a grifter. He's just trying to make money. He sells t-shirts. He has merch. And so I've noticed all of them have been attacked for it. Anybody who makes t-shirts, they attack you for it, right? Jimmy Dore gets attacked for it. Gray Zone gets attacked for it. Anyone who makes t-shirts, that's their argument against you. Oh, they're just trying to make money. It's a scam. Oh, look, they made t-shirts. The funny thing is CPI, we never have actually made t-shirts. And so they attack us for books. I am not joking. Surfing USA and Rotten Quesadilla and these bread tube scum, we don't make t-shirts. And so they say, oh, they're just trying to make money off the books. Dude, we lose money on books, right? I mean, I mean, with the books, you're talking about books we sell at events. They see a literature table with books on it, and they're just like, you're making money off that. No, we're losing money on that. Do we make money off people buying books on Amazon? Sure. But do we make money off book tables someplace? No, we generally tend to lose money, on those book tables, right? I mean, it's just, and it's like, oh, they're selling books. I'm sorry, should we give them away? I mean, we give a lot of books away. If you come to our event on July 10th, if you come to the indoor, event, the legal event afterwards, you'll get a copy of of my book. Everyone who came to our conference in March gets one. We have quite a few copies of this book to give away. We have whole boxes of them. So, I got it printed in mass. So we give away a lot of books anyway. I mean, this idea that, and they run this, right? And that, like Jimmy Dore, that's great. If people love Jimmy Dore enough that they want to wear a t-shirt that he made, awesome. What could be wrong with that? Right. I mean, and I think we should have merch. We've just never gotten around to it. Every time we've tried to find a merch thing, like we get offers that are not good. And, we need to find the right merch dealer and design the right shirts. And we got to do it right. Right now, we have some beautiful t-shirts that Elizabeth Young, our president, designed for the CPI retreat. Did people like that video that we did of the latest retreat, by the way? Did people like it? Because I thought that was great. It really kind of captured the essence of that retreat. I spent a long time kind of working on that video to kind of show you the community. You don't really know what our events are like until you come to one. But I try to give people a sense of what our events are really like. And the t-shirts that we were wearing, those CPI shirts, I thought they were really, really great. So yeah, there you go. Strange Bedfellows liked it. Lori liked it. Well, that's good. Yeah. You really, a lot of things happen on the internet, but what we're doing here is not online entertainment. As I've been telling people, we're building a network now, a network of anti-imperialists who can rely on each other. And, that's what we're doing here. We are building a network. And so we had an in real life meetup, and that was just kind of a highlight of some of the discussion, some of the classes, the talent show, etc. I'm going to start posting the classes that we did soon. We got a lot of classes to edit. Great video work was done. Shout out to Killian, shout out to Tyler. They did great video work. And then they gave it to me like right then, like boom, which is usually I spend, I have to get the video from the video guy like 2 weeks later. No, this time the video was like in my hand the day the retreat was over. I took it home with me. I was like, damn, this is great. So, I've got video to edit of the retreat, and I'm looking forward to doing that. Yeah, I mean, look, we're marching ahead as an organization. So, yeah, t-shirts. Maybe we'll do a Huey Newton t-shirt one of these days. All right. Someone said, I liked how Huey rejected the dogmatism right there with the priests of Marx. Well, he was doing a rhetorical technique, right? He was doing this thing. He was saying, well, I'm not a Marxist, by the way. I don't believe anyone should blindly follow anybody. It's like, okay, I get what you're doing there, and you're making a point. You're trying to get people to understand what Marx really said and not view you as just being a regurgitator or a follower. I get what you're doing. And that was what Huey Newton was trying to accomplish in that interview. He was trying to get people to understand his view of the world, including dialectical materialism, anti-colonialism, why we think in this very narrow way about what democracy means, etc. And I mean, it was great that they gave him the airtime to do that. I just, watching that, I mean, people, and that's kind of what John pointed out in his super chat earlier, is that people probably were more impacted by that back then. That was 1973 was the year of the interview. But nowadays that interview, even then, I feel like a lot of people, that interview would have just gone right over their heads because people just have no context with which to understand these things. But I thought that was fascinating. It was a great suggestion to just put that interview on. Spencer references 1776 and the American Revolution. And it was great. I can tell the audience really enjoyed it, right? It was a slice of history. You got to watch an actual Black Marxist revolutionary talking to his audience. That was pretty cool. That was pretty great. A great way to spend the 4th of July. So there you go. There you go. All right. I've got one more super chat, but if people have any more super chats, send them my way. If not, we'll be wrapping up here pretty soon. But, we haven't been going for that long. So if anyone has anything else they want me to talk about, by all means, send a super chat in. Get me talking. We're heading towards the wrap up of tonight's stream. But John McCarthy says Preisner slimes Tulsi Gabbard too much. Yeah, and that's the problem, right? Look, PSL, the Party of Socialism and Liberation, will not break with wokeness. They won't break with wokeness. And they just can't get it through their heads that you will never please these people. And they also think that they own anti-war protesting, right? And that's why they were so against the Rage Against the War Machine protest. And that isn't even a political thing. Like they were mad at the Workers' World Party for staging protests. They were mad at the RCP for staging protests. They think they own anti-war protesting, right? And they reserve the permits for years in advance, and they have a team of lawyers, and it's like they've monetized anti-war protests. That's probably, I think, the main outrage they had about Rage Against the War Machine. But then on top of that, there's also this weird, like, they hate anyone who they perceive as being quote unquote right wing. If they think anyone's right wing, they're bad. And they can't get through their head that at this point, anything anti-establishment is getting labeled right wing. Anything anti-establishment, right? If you're critical of the vaccines, right wing. That used to be the left that criticized Big Pharma. Not no more, right? If you're critical of the wars, they label you as spreading conspiracy theories, right? If you're not in favor of the government and big tech censoring the internet and trying to shut down anti-imperialist voices, well, then you are you're a conspiracy theorist. I mean, the establishment is using wokeism and woke white privilege buzzwords to justify their crackdown on all dissident voices. And PSL just can't get that through their heads. And that's why they're mad at Tulsi Gabbard, because Tulsi Gabbard, she's not a leftist. I mean, she's U.S. military, and, she ran as a Democrat, but she's not a leftist. She's not a Marxist. She's not a communist. She's a conservative Hindu. She practices Hinduism as her religion, a wing of the Hare Krishna movement. And because of that, she's illiberal. She's at odds with the liberal order, but she's not a leftist. She's not a socialist. Well, I think it's great that we have someone in Tulsi Gabbard's position who is criticizing the wars, criticizing the crackdown on our civil liberties. I think that's great. So, does socialism mix with Enlightenment philosophy? Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, what is Enlightenment philosophy? It's just philosophy that comes from that time. Socialism, I would argue, Marxism as a political current and the modern socialist movement has its roots in the ideals of the French Revolution and the ideals of bourgeois democracy, right? As capitalism was replacing feudalism, you had a wave of revolutions that happened. You had the English Civil War. You had the French Revolution, the American Revolution of 1776. And these were all mass uprisings of the people against the kings, against the Catholic Church, against the institutions that existed, rising up against them, demanding life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, and property, liberty, egalite, fraternity, the rights of man, etc. And they largely failed to create egalitarian societies. And, 1848, the year of 1848 is kind of, that's the year that Marxism established itself as a movement. That's the year the Communist Manifesto was published. That's the year of the German Revolution that failed. 1848 was a mass revolt that happened in Germany, but it happened in all across Europe. I mean, according to some studies, there were like 200 different armed uprisings in Europe in the year of 1848. They called it the Spring of Nations, and it was the ideals of the French Revolution, and people disappointed with the outcome of the French Revolution. And it was all across Europe. People were rising up against the monarchies, against feudalism, demanding the rights of man. And that's when Marxism was established. So you could say that Marxism has its roots in that, and in that revolutionary intelligentsia. But it was largely because the bourgeois revolutions failed to produce an egalitarian society. You had some of the radicals who were inspired by the revolutions asking why. And you have Henry Saint-Simon, you have Fourier, you have Robert Owen, and the utopian socialists. The first socialists kind of are people that are saying, well, the bourgeois revolutions didn't accomplish the equal society they were promising to create. They didn't create that. They failed to achieve what they promised to achieve. right? And because they failed to achieve that, we need to have more revolutions. And so I would say that that's the roots of it. But the whole thesis that I talk about in this book, but also in City Builders and Vandals, and is that I argue that Marxism began in Europe among the revolutionary intelligentsia, but it gradually moved away from that. And that the confusion is that the aesthetics and the emotions of the revolutionary intelligentsia have been hijacked by the imperialists in the age of color revolutions, while socialism as an economic system, public control of the means of production as a means to unleash growth and development, has become somewhat conservative in that it is a mechanism for countries around the world to resist the domination of Western capitalism and raise their people up out of poverty. And that the economics of Marxism are largely correct, but Marxism attached itself to the Enlightenment, to the revolutionary intelligentsia. And that made sense at the time. But now it's gotten very muddled and confused, and that's why our political compass is broken. That's why things are so odd in our time. It's so odd in our time because, you know, what we consider to be the left feelings, the left emotions have been hijacked by imperialism, whereas socialism exists all over the world, but socialism as an economic system has become somewhat conservative. And, you know, we no longer as leftists have control. And I mean, our enemies, the imperialists, the ruling class, the biggest capitalists in the world, have ownership over the revolutionary aesthetic. You know, Che Guevara became mass commercialized revolution and uprisings and revolts, and that's all Twitter and Facebook and the U.S. State Department. That's what they're all about. Meanwhile, socialism as a mechanism for building countries up, that movement, you know, expresses itself very differently. And so that's why things are confused in our time. And I've tried to, some of the classes at the recent retreat, I tried to get into that some. And, you know, it's important to understand how politics have gotten confused. PSL version of the Marxist 5-year plan is reserving permits for 2028. Yeah, I mean, PSL, they have no strategy for getting out of the movement to the masses. Their whole strategy is to take over the movement, to lead the movement. And the movement is whatever liberals are doing. Liberals are protesting Trump. Well, they want to get the permits for the Stop Trump protest cage. Liberals are protesting for abortion rights. They're going to set up an abortion group to go out and protest for, right? You know, the PSL, their whole strategy is they're movementarians, which comes out of their Sam Marcy Workers' World origins. And that kind of thinking probably made sense in the 70s and 80s, maybe even in the 90s. But we're in such a different ballpark. If you're a Marxist, if you want to have the working class rise up against capitalism, that is your stated goal. You can't confine yourself to what liberals and woke activists are doing. You need to go among the people. And the people largely hate liberals and woke activists, and vice versa. The woke activists hate the people, right? And that we need a new orientation where our goal is to organize the masses. Mao Zedong, he said, the masses are the water, the revolutionary are the fish. Well, you know, the wokes are not the masses, and the bulk of the American people can't stand wokeism. You know, that's why Trump is wildly more popular than Biden. That's why among Democrats, RFK, who is not woke, is wildly popular. The percentage of Americans that are woke is a small number. It's a small number. People don't like the political correctness. People don't like the pronoun police. People don't like the idea that censorship is a good thing, that you should be able to shut down free speech on the internet, cancel culture. People say the wrong thing and it destroys their life. They lose their job. People don't like that. People don't like that. And the people who do like that are not the ones that are going to lead any uprising against the American establishment. That's for sure. But PSL won't break with that because PSL is really a protest hustle. You know, that they are movement hustlers. It is the way that they've learned to make money. They reserve the cage. They sue for the permit when it's denied. They set up the protest. And that's why PSL is a very movementarian group. If you come around PSL, if you show up at a PSL event and you talk the way we talk on these streams, if you sound like Huey Newton just sounded on there, they're going to view you with suspicion. And they're going to say, well, you know, we're real organizers here. We do real activism. We're not interested in those books by old white men. They have this they're anti-intellectual, right? It's, if you're smart, if you know stuff, that means you're an autistic white male. They don't like people that seem like they know anything. And I've been around them long enough. I'll just tell you, I have talked to PSL people. They do not like anyone who actually takes Marxism seriously. Anyone who engages with these ideas, they don't like you. They want people who are good at protesting, who will go to the rallies, who are good at pointing at people and saying, you're racist, right? That's what they like to do. And that's the way PSL really kind of functions as a group. They are very good at pointing at people and calling them racist and telling them that they're right wing and they should shut up. But they really do not. They do not want to engage about ideology or history. And that's, many times I was in DC, I'd see libertarians try to argue with PSL and they wouldn't have an answer for them. These libertarians say communism failed everywhere it's ever been tried. They wouldn't have an answer. Right. It's really sad, but the anti-intellectualism of this activist left, it's bad in the fact that they don't have answers, but it's really bad in the sense that it leads to a situation where if you're at all smart, you can't be part of the left anymore. And it leads them to just tailing after a very toxic trend among the ruling class. The ruling class is pushing this woke-ism stuff to push degrowth, to save capitalism by grinding the country into poverty. And, PSL goes along with that because, well, if you don't, you're racist. Because if you don't, then you must be right wing, and right wing is bad. So there you go. Out of the movement to the masses is what the Center for Political Innovation is all about. And we're about bringing socialism to the broad masses of Americans, putting forward an economic program to save the country. We're about not offending Christians, not offending patriots, people that love their country, want to make their country a better place. That's what we're about. We're about making a better life and showing people who are suffering right now that socialism is the answer and capitalism is the reason that they're suffering, and that they have a common interest with the people around the world that are struggling against U.S. imperialism. One of the former PSL members who's in the Center for Political Innovation pointed out that their anti-imperialism is really just victimology. Right? Just like they see things in terms of this woke victimology. Black people are victims of racism. Women are victims of sexism. And so in their minds, Cuba is a victim of U.S. imperialism. China is a victim of U.S. imperialism. They don't identify the broad masses of Americans, the bulk of the American people, as being in solidarity with a mighty movement of resistance around the world. They don't see it that way. They see it all in terms of victimology. Right. And they kind of celebrate anyone that they perceive as being a victim or being oppressed, when actually Marxism is not about seeing people as victims and seeing people as oppressed. It's rather about seeing people as being empowered, helping people find their own strength and helping people to see their common interest. Right. That this is from the Communist Manifesto. The proletarian movement is the self-conscious, independent movement of the immense majority in the interest of the immense majority, right? All other previous movements have been in the interest of minorities, but Marxism is in the interest of the immense majority. It is our task to show the American people, the immense majority, that China is their friend, that Russia is their friend, that Vietnam and Cuba and Iran are their friends, and that imperialism is their enemy. It's not our job to go around, shaming the American people, telling the American people, oh, there's these people that are being victimized. Aren't you ashamed? That's not our job. Our job is to empower the American people, make them feel strong and powerful, and get them to see that they have strong and powerful allies, and that we don't need the bosses need us. That was a quote, a chant the Wobblies used to chant. We don't need the bosses need us. We don't need the bosses need us. Well, we don't need the imperialists. We don't need Wall Street. We don't need BlackRock, right? We don't need the Pentagon. We don't need George Soros. They need us. And it is our wealth and our labor that produces so much. And it is our class, the working class, that is the majority of humanity. And that we have a common interest in defeating the imperialists. That is what our job is. We must defeat U.S. imperialism, and we must mobilize the U.S. working class to defeat U.S. imperialism. And if we see things in terms of victimology, we're never going to do that. So yeah, those are my thoughts when you ask me about PSL. I wrote a whole polemic against them and the Workers' World Party. You can find it on the CPI website. It's called "The Masses Are the Water: Understanding the Failures of Late Marxism." And I'll just drop the link in the chat. But I do want to end by saying that I respect Sam Marcy. I respect Sam Marcy a lot. I think Sam Marcy was a brilliant organizer, He had his limitations. I have my limitations. You know, other people have limitations. Nobody's perfect, right? We can be critical. This is my assessment of the Marxist tendency that gave birth to the PSL, the Workers' World Party, etc. But I will say also that Sam Marcy was way better than his ideological successors. Go and read this beautiful letter that Sam Marcy wrote to the workers of Louisiana. We published it on our website because we are convinced the Workers' World Party wants to pretend this article never existed. But Sam Marcy was critical of affirmative action. He believed in affirmative action, but he was critical of the way it was administered. He said that affirmative action, the way it was administered, where it hurt white workers in order to advance black workers, was not correct. He said they needed to develop affirmative action that advances all workers, but gives special attention to the black workers. And this beautiful letter he wrote to the workers of Louisiana, urging them not to vote for David Duke, is really, really beautiful and powerful. In fact, you know, what the heck? It's the 4th of July. And just to show up the people, right, who quote Marcy, think they're the ideological successors of Sam Marcy, why not? I'm actually going to read to you some of Sam Marcy's letter to the workers of Louisiana, right? Because this letter is written by a communist organizer. He's writing it to a bunch of white workers in Louisiana, urging them not to vote for David Duke, the white supremacist. David Duke was running for governor of Louisiana. He had a very good chance of winning. And so Sam Marcy wrote this letter as a communist, urging them not to vote for David Duke. And what did he do? Did he say, "You disgusting racist"? No, this is how he urged the workers of Louisiana not to vote for David Duke. Right? I just dropped the link in the chat. I'm going to read it here. If you are one of the 1 million or so workers in Louisiana, you may be thinking of voting for David Duke in Saturday's gubernatorial election. As a worker, you have much to think about these days. Almost everyone agrees these are hard times. Some people say the depression now hitting this country began 10 years ago in Louisiana. As a worker, you are concerned with your own livelihood and standard of living. If you have a family or dependents, you are certainly concerned with them. Right? Religion should have no place in this campaign. Religious beliefs of any person, whether Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, or whatever, should be considered a private affair. The Constitution prohibits state promotion of religion. This is a political campaign, not a religious one. Throwing it into the campaign diverts attention from the fundamental issues, which have to do with economic, social, and political problems in Louisiana. You might have received a letter from your employer urging you to vote against Duke. Quite a few companies have been sending such letters to their workers. It's a violation of the Constitution and labor relations law to tell workers how to vote, either in union elections or political campaigns. Of course, many workers who know the anti-labor record of the companies they work for are suspicious when their boss suddenly goes on a media campaign against Duke. Where have they been all this time, and why right now? The way they're talking now, you would think that gas and oil would evaporate and the Mississippi River dry up if Duke was elected. However, these bosses might quickly change their minds the day after the election and embrace Duke, the same way the German industrialists and bankers supported Hitler. These are questions we have to keep in mind when the bosses, and some are the most greedy when it comes to wages and working conditions, suddenly become knights in shining armor, urging us to do battle. Whatever their motives may be, it has nothing to do with our own interests as workers. So right there, he's saying that the capitalist bosses, their campaign against David Duke has nothing to do with his campaign against David Duke. Every worker ought to question their motivation. It has always been how to get profit out of their enterprises by taking our labor and giving us little in return as possible. But let's not speculate on what their motives may be. Let's examine David Duke independently of what they say and consider his candidacy from the point of view of our class interest as workers. David Duke has been a state representative long enough that he should have been able to clearly and simply address the burning issues facing Louisiana. Their joblessness, health care for hundreds of who have none, the growing poverty, which is 20% above the national level. Yet he has introduced no bill, made no speeches, nor raised as much of a whisper with connections of these profound issues. David Duke has avoided addressing the most important question of all. That is, why should this state, which is so rich in natural resources, have so many poor people? And why should you as a worker have to worry about your job? Louisiana is not poor. It has one of the greatest natural resources in the world, oil. It has another important source of energy, natural gas. It has big petrochemical industry. Its fertile soil provides a rich variety of agricultural products that are shipped to all parts of the world. Its forests yield lumber and paper products off the coasts, our rich fishing areas. So why is life becoming more difficult? Consider one thing which Duke never seems to mention. Whether you make your living as a wage worker or a professional, your income level is lower than that for comparable work in northern, eastern, and central states of the United States. If you're a public school teacher in Louisiana, you earn on average $21,000 in 1987. But a teacher in New York gets $32,000 in the same year. Wages have gone up a bit since 1987, but the differential is about the same. And that's a fact, and facts are stubborn things. This kind of differential pay between Louisiana and other states holds true not only for teachers, but other professionals, but also for all workers. Some say, and properly so, that wages in Louisiana are better than Mississippi, Arkansas, and other states of the old Confederacy. But that only helps make the most important point. Why should southern states have lower wages than the rest of the United States? It's not because of geography. It's history that makes that difference. And he goes on. This is a beautiful letter, right? It's a beautiful, beautiful letter. He talks about affirmative action in this letter. I mean, he talks about so many things. And yeah, this is the section white workers and affirmative action. In addition to welfare, Duke harps on about affirmative action. As he tells it, whites are being penalized because the law now requires that Black and Latino workers who have faced past discrimination should be compensated affirmatively in promotions. There's no reason that affirmative action has to hurt white workers. Discrimination in the past was the result of the policies of the bosses. They instituted discrimination in the workplace, and they should pay for it. Are there ways to erase racial discrimination in the workplace without taking it out of the hides of white workers? Take the matter of promotions. Say a white male is entitled to a promotion from labor grade 2 to labor grade 3, but a Black or woman worker with less seniority is now eligible for the job because of the law on affirmative action. The worker who would have gotten the job on the basis of seniority should also get an equivalent pay increase. That way, the worker isn't penalized because of past discrimination practices of the company. There can be many other approaches to make sure that affirmative action doesn't hurt any workers. It is a pity that the labor movement has gradually acquiesced to a halfway measure regarding affirmative action, which puts the burden on the workers, and it leaves the labor movement open to vicious racism. Duke doesn't address the question of why Louisiana pays out so little in unemployment benefits when so many are out of work. Unemployment insurance isn't just a federal program like Social Security, it's a federal state system. Why would this be an opportunity for Duke? Wouldn't this be an opportunity for Duke if he really was for the workers to demand a state extension of benefits? That is particularly important in the state of Louisiana, where the crisis has lasted so long that benefits have run out for hundreds of thousands. Living in Louisiana, you have seen periods of boom as well as bust, especially in the oil and gas industry. The boom periods have made the powerful corporations richer, more aggressive, and predatory. But they have left the workers. Have they left the workers any better off? Louisiana has the resources to be one of the most self-sufficient states in the Union. Instead, it has become more dependent on what is happening to the economy, not just nationally, but globally. And why is that? If all the natural wealth of Louisiana were being utilized to provide for the needs of the residents of the state, there wouldn't be any problem. But that's not what's happening. Everything is produced in order to make profit. When the profit system goes bust, the most significant sections of the population, the workers, are left helpless. But the workers don't have to be helpless. We're the majority of the population. If we get together, we can be tremendously powerful. We have the ability to stop everything from moving, as can be seen in other countries when workers go out on a general strike. Certainly, the big bosses are aware of that, and will do everything they can to prevent the workers from getting any ideas. That can mean throwing their weight behind a demagogue like Duke in order to get him elected so he can channel everything into racist struggle. What is needed in Louisiana, as elsewhere, is a change in relationship between the working class and the capitalist class. It is necessary for the working class to take control of the natural resources and the means of production and use them in the interest of society as a whole, not for a handful of millionaires and billionaires. Voting against Duke will help open the road to such a development. That is how Sam Marcy urged the workers of Louisiana not to vote for David Duke. He didn't shame them. He didn't attack them. He acknowledged their grievances, but he said racism isn't the answer. Racism is the boss's tool, and that fighting for black people is good for the workers. Scapegoating black people it hurts all working people. That was Sam Marcy's approach to the race question. He supported black nationalism. He supported Minister Farrakhan. He supported the Nation of Islam. He supported Mumia Abu-Jamal. He was in the courtroom with the leader of the MOVE organization, John Africa. Sam Marcy was dedicated to the black liberation struggle. But his orientation was that in order for the white working class to support the black liberation struggle, you needed to show that it was in their overall economic interest. You had to argue that all workers are hurt by racism and that we need to build a united front, a class struggle united front to advance all working people, right? And that, that highlighting the needs of black people, highlighting the suffering of black people was a way to advance the entire working class. That was his line. And that's completely contrary to the woke stuff. Woke-ism says that white workers are bad, that they benefit from racism, they should be shamed. And that is a losing strategy. That is a losing strategy because nobody ever wants to hear that they have it too good. And all working people in America deserve a better life as our country's falling apart. And so that was Sam Marcy's letter to the workers of Louisiana. I encourage you to share that. Share that with any member of PSL, right? Because that approach, that's a winning class struggle approach to the oppression of black people, to fighting racism among white workers. That is a winning class struggle approach, and that is not the approach of the woke synthetic left. And on that note, I am going to put on the closing music, and we're going to end our program for tonight. Happy 4th of July, everybody. Don't forget this country started with a revolution. Don't forget it. And, we'll be back maybe tomorrow night. I don't know if it'll be tomorrow night, but we'll be back. Talk to you soon. Surge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.